the only place for everything Vikings. 6, 1, 2, Vikings.
Welcome back to the 612 Vikings podcast. I am Dustin alongside Drew here. We're coming off of an undefeated preseason by the Minnesota Vikings. We haven't seen that for a couple of years now, since the Zimmer days of the Minnesota Vikings. So it's finally nice to see us win an actual game, let alone go undefeated. So, Drew, how are we doing today, man? We've concluded the preseason and we're on to week 1.
Yeah, it's a very Jekyll and Hyde preseason for us. You know, after having such a long losing streak of losing in the preseason, it's actually kind of nice to have something different. And Clacy and Kevin O'Connell definitely had a tough challenge on their hands for the first time in what seems like forever too, because now it kind of came to be that time where it became difficult to cut guys versus just making it easy because guys were underperforming in preseason. So it was definitely, I could tell it was definitely a tough challenge. We had to say goodbye to some former players that, former all pros and some players that were definitely well liked among the fan base, but we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure, in the video. So.
Yeah, for sure. And, honestly, we'll probably get right into it. Before we get into that, I just want to shout out SeatGeek for you guys. Make sure you guys download SeatGeek. Use promo code THATVIKINGSFAN for $20 off your first order. And, hey, $20 is $20. Save yourself some money. Any sporting event, any concert, anything like that. Monster Jam sometimes at US Bank Stadium. That's always fun. So make sure you guys go download SeatGeek, and we'll get right into this. So we're going to go over the 53-man roster because that just came out a day or two ago now, and we're finally ready to kind of digest everything, sleep on it, get our great takes on that. So let's go over this, and we will kind of go through the roster right now, and then we'll go through our predictions on what we thought would happen. So just kind of going through this real quick, not too many standouts. Just kind of, it is what it is. Not too many surprises, I should say. And, here's the IR. And then they got different subcategories as well, but got a lot of other guys on their practice squad. So, yeah, like I said, we'll get right into this. First, we'll go over our predictions. So, Kenny Nwangu, no longer on the roster. CJ Ham, Ty Chandler, and Aaron Jones are your 3 running backs, because I don't know if CJ Ham's an actual running back, but he's a fullback on our team. Aaron Jones and Ty Chandler are only 2 running backs on the roster going into week 1. I assume that we'll probably sign a running back before then. But Drew, what's your take on the running back situation right now?
To be honest, I kind of came away with that a little bit confused because it seems like, going into the Giants game, if Aaron Jones goes down or Ty Chandler goes down, we're kind of in a pickle now because you're kind of relying on, Aaron Jones. Let's say it's Ty Chandler that goes down. Aaron Jones, who, let's face it, does have a history of not being able to complete a full season. And he did get hurt week 1 last year against the Bears. He had a hamstring injury. If you don't remember, he had the big touchdown grab. And I believe it was like a pulled hamstring or something like that. So if one of them goes down, we're kind of just biting our nails trying to see if, Ty Chandler or Aaron Jones, whoever, can get us to the finish line because, CJ Ham is a guy who hasn't played running back since college. So he's been a career fullback in the NFL. I just don't know if they're going to really address it. I hope it is something they do address. I don't think that this initial 53-man roster is set in stone. There have been some steam. There's been some steam on like Brian Asamoah still being traded and Caleb Evans being traded. So just because these guys are on the initial 53-man roster doesn't mean we'll see that lineup on game day. So I'm still thinking there's possibly one move left out there. I was looking at a guy like Samaje Perine, that he is a bruiser, bulldozer kind of back, which we do kind of need because Ty Chandler is kind of more your speed guy. Aaron Jones is more of your receiving back, I would say. And we just really don't have that bruiser to kind of get in those short yardage situations. And I thought that was a guy that fit what the Vikings were looking for perfectly, but he did just get signed by the Chiefs. So we'll see if there's anybody out there, there's some running backs still out there. I'm sure there's always some running backs there, but it seems like they're all kind of getting snubbed up right now with the waiver wire being so hot right now. So we'll see what they do. I mean, they very well might roll with 2 guys for week 1. It's not something I would personally agree with. I do think you need just a little bit more depth out of that, but we'll see how it goes in week 1 and between now and week 1 to say. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. And to add, Kenny Nwangu, for those of you that don't know, just got signed by the Saints earlier today. So there's your 2 running backs, and then Kenny Nwangu, he's on the Saints. CJ Ham, obviously still on the Vikings. Wide receiver, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor, Brandon Powell, Trent Sherfield, Tristan Jackson. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is what they've actually kept with, opposed to our predictions. So, yeah, that's what they actually went with. So, no issues there. I don't think any guy should have made it over another guy, unless you disagree.
No, I like I said, these were our predictions going in to the cut down day. So this is something we both kind of were talking about, and this just seemed like almost like a consensus, wide receiver room. And I think they all kind of complement each other fairly nicely. Outside of Jefferson and Addison, who you just know are going to show up and produce on day 1, I don't think there's any issues with that. But the depth after that, after the departure of KJ Osborne, it was really who's going to step up as the wide receiver 3, and it's looking like it's going to be Jalen Naylor. Brandon Powell, I believe, is going to be the potential replacement on the new kickoff rules, so he will see some action in the kick return game. Ty Chandler will be your kick returner 1 now, so that those 2 guys will be the primary kick returners. Then you got Trent Sherfield, who brings a little bit of a different aspect. He's a little bit more of a bigger body, but he can run block very, very good. Hopefully that can open up those stretch plays, which is something Kevin O'Connell in that zone blocking scheme is definitely a big part in. And it is something we really kind of didn't see last year. It might explain some of the struggles we had. We weren't really able to run wide, and we were very limited because Alexander Massey really isn't that speed guy. And then when Ty Chandler came in, you just saw the running game open up beautifully, and it was really prevalent against Cincinnati. So I think Trent Sherfield, will be wide receiver 5. I don't think he's really there to be the potential sleeper like an Adam Thielen in the past, who's kind of buried late in the 53-man roster, and you saw him rise. I think he'll just be a guy who could block and open up the run game a little bit. And then obviously the preseason hero, Tristan Jackson, he'll most likely see some special teams action. Showed up really well in the preseason. So maybe if anyone were to be like an Adam Thielen, where you start off at the bottom and then you move up, could be Tristan Jackson. We'll know. Well, we'll see what it brings us, but we'll see what happens with Tristan Jackson. I do think it'll be primarily special teams, though. Usually guys probably out in the wing or field goal returns or something. That's probably my guess for it. But nice little depth piece in case Jalen Naylor goes down.
Yeah, and to add on to Tristan Jackson too, is he's 26 years old too, and that light at the end of the tunnel is really opening up. Or getting smaller, though, depending on how you look at it, because being 26 years old, this is your last chance to make an NFL roster, and he's proven time and time again in training camp that he's played pretty well. And a couple times last year in the Falcons game, he stepped up pretty big, and he's just haven't really had his main shot to be consistently, get some playing time, I guess. So we'll see how Tristan Jackson gets used in the next coming weeks and this year at least. So we'll see how Tristan Jackson is. Tight ends with TJ Hawkinson on IR, or I guess the PUP list. We got Josh Oliver, Johnny Munt, Nick Muse, N'Keal Harry. He's on the practice squad. We'll get to that later as well. But your 3 tight ends rolling into the season: Oliver, Munt, and Muse. I think Johnny Munt will be your starter tight end because that's what he was in training camp, where he was in that Hawkinson role. So other than that, no real big surprises here.
Yeah, it is something I thought they were going to roll out. It's pretty clear with obviously the injury to J.J. McCarthy for the season. I think they're going to try to ease Darnold into the season, try not to put too much pressure on him because the Vikings are saying this is still a win now season, even with Darnold at the quarterback. But having a guy like Oliver Munt, those two tight ends, I don't care what I'm sure you've probably seen on TikTok. You're scrolling through or Twitter, you get all the fantasy football, experts that are going and saying don't draft Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones will do very, very well these first few weeks with guys like Oliver and Munt blocking. And like I said, Aaron Jones will be a guy that will stretch it out. You're going to see a lot of toss plays, a lot of stretch plays. They're going to try to expand that defense and make him run sideline to sideline. Aaron Jones will do very well in this offense to start, especially at the team like the the team against the Giants, and potentially the Niners. I did feel like we kind of ran the ball pretty effectively with Cam Akers against the Niners last season. So I think Aaron Jones is going to be a nice secret weapon where people are going to, kind of bite their words, bite their lip, bite their words, however you prefer to say it. But I think Aaron Jones is going to do really well, having two blocking tight ends. Josh Oliver, I think, is still the best blocking tight end in the league. If you're just talking strictly blocking, Johnny Munt is an excellent blocking tight end. But I still think Josh Oliver will be the tight end one. We kind of look back to when, he did get hurt. Josh Oliver was still the guy that was kind of starting that in that TJ Hawkinson role last year. Me personally, I don't think there's anything that's going to really change between last year with Johnny Munt and now. I think he's pushing his late 20s right now. So I think he kind of is who he is. But Nick Muse, if anyone could maybe surprise, I think it could be Nick Muse. He's been very efficient. PFF has listed him as he's always getting graded really high in the preseasons. Even in during the regular season, he had a couple plays, but he's always graded really, really highly. I think Nick Muse is a guy who could be a potential, sleeper pick who could get in some into the mix too with some plays. And honestly, I think that's kind of my underrated pick to see if anyone is going to step up. I would say Nick Muse will probably be the guy who could probably step up the most out of those three guys in the receiving game mostly. But yeah, I really like that Nick Muse made this roster. I think it's long overdue. He's been kind of bouncing, going back and forth, bouncing between the roster and the practice squad. So to see a guy, who's definitely got an interesting, unique personality to say the least, he's finally made the initial 53. So I'm definitely excited for him for that.
Yeah, and he's really showed out through the preseason games and in training camp as well. The coaching staff really likes him, so that's good. And to start on the 53-man roster to start week one is a big step for a guy like Nick Muse, where he's, like you said, bounced around on the roster and the practice squad. So it'll be nice to see all three of those tight ends get a shot at, obviously some playing time. And, a guy like N'Keal Harry, he might be on the roster and the practice squad here and there just because of him switching positions from wide receiver to tight end. He might see the field every once in a while in some games or, a couple games or two this year. So we'll see how that tight end room kind of shakes out the rest of the season. But I really do like how it is set right now until Hawkinson comes back. And I think we got a good group of guys there. So moving on to the offensive line, I'm just going to kind of group these three positions together. We're going to go with Christian Darrisaw, obviously a lock, O'Neal a lock, Walter Rouse, the rookie, David Quessenberry, the swing tackle, Blake Brandel is your starting left guard, Ed Ingram is your starting right guard, Michael Juergens, I believe he is now the third string center, but also plays guard. I think he's a backup guard as well. Garrett Bradbury, and then Dan Feeney is your backup center. So no, I don't think anybody, let's see, we can take a look actually. Nobody different from the predictions. So I like that group of guys as well.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry. David Quessenberry is kind of the interesting one for me, but Dalton Reisner is a guy that made that short-term IR. I didn't want to throw that out. Is there still a spot for him on this roster? I don't know. It's really tough to say because if he does come off that short-term IR, that 21-day window will open up. I think they're going to try and max it out as most as they can. But I think David Quessenberry is probably going to be the odd man out if they do want to still keep Dalton Risner on this roster, and then they use Walter Rouse to be more of that swing tackle. I think really it's just going to depend on how Darisaw and O'Neal, if they stay healthy, because Darisaw has had some seasons where he's been banged up and missed a few games. Brian O'Neal, people do forget 2 years ago, he did have a torn Achilles. And that's something that, definitely builds up scar tissue. It's really not the same strength as it was when, pre-injury. So
especially as a heavy guy like him.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And David Quessenberry, I think he's in his early 30s. I think he's like early mid 30s. And I want to say he's like 33. So, he was really good in the preseason. I do think he deserved to make the roster, given that Dalton Risner was on IR. I know we just had Tyler on last episode. He doesn't think Dalton Risner was going to make it. Obviously he's somewhat correct. He's still on the Vikings roster, just on a short-term IR. But I do think that there is still a path for Dalton Risner to make this roster, but I do think it's going to come between Quessenberry and Risner for that final roster spot, because I do think that they could maybe use Brandel or Ingram or Risner based on whoever they want to start. And then Juergens will obviously play more of that Chris Reed role from last year. So, but we'll see how it goes. Dalton Risner, I don't think that I wouldn't write him off just yet to be off the roster, but we'll see how this goes. And who knows too? He might just be a guy who starts on short-term IR, finishes off on the long-term IR just to keep him on the roster for another year. So we'll see how this thing shakes up. And I think it'll be definitely exciting when week 4 rolls around, when these short-term IR guys bounce off when they're eligible to come off the IR there.
Yeah, for sure. One thing to add to before we move on to the defense is the Vikings really value their guys that can play multiple positions on the offensive line. So a guy like David Quessenberry, where he can play left tackle and right tackle. Walter Rouse, in the preseason games we just saw, he played right tackle for like the first quarter and then played right guard for the second quarter or whatever it was. A guy like Blake Brandel, he can play tackle and guard. You have a rookie like Michael Juergens, where he'll play center and guard. So someone that can play multiple positions on that offensive line are very valuable for the Vikings. And a guy like Dalton Risner, he plays left guard all the time. That's his position, and he hasn't played any other position in the NFL. And when the Vikings told him, hey, we want you to play right guard or compete at right guard for the starting spot, you're going to have to earn that. He's never played at that position before. So really challenge Ed Ingram, where Ed Ingram has played in that position at right guard in the NFL. And, not to say that he hasn't had success, but he's been very inconsistent at that. It's really telling of that as well. So to keep Risner on an IR list instead of just releasing him or anything really is interesting as well, because they like him enough to keep him around, but everybody thought that they were just going to let go of Risner. And I remember a couple months back when we re-signed him, I was like, could he be a potential cut candidate? And everybody looked at me and was like, oh, why would you do that? He's a great depth piece, blah, blah, blah. And, looking back at it now, the Vikings didn't really, I don't know what it was, miscommunication or whatever, but to keep him on IR for now is an interesting move. So we'll see how that plays out, like you said, when he's eligible to come off that list. So
yeah, and I do want to finish off before we move on to the defense. It is relieving that we won't have to throw out a guard who's never played center before in his life, like we did against the Packers in 2022, where we had to throw Chris Reed under fire against one of the best nose tackles in the league against Kenny Clark. And that Michael Juergens, like Dustin said earlier, is a guy that can play guard and center. Dan Feeney can play guard and center. So basically, we essentially have 3 centers on this roster, and the odds of you going down 3 centers in one game is obviously slim to none. So it is relieving that we don't have to worry about snaps going over Kirk's head and helping contribute to a momentum killer and being blown out on the road against your biggest rival. So it is relieving now that Michael Juergens is a guy that can do both, and he'll be the 3rd string there. So,
yeah. Going on to the defensive line, I don't know if I should group these together, but I'll separate them for now. We'll go edge and then defensive tackle. So your edge, rookie Dallas Turner, Jonathan Grenard from the Texans, Andrew Van Ginkel, Jihad Ward, and Patrick Jones. Just comparing this to the actual roster, yeah, no surprises there. So far, we've only had one wrong, which is actually really surprising for all, I guess, surprising moves that the Vikings had. So yeah, the edge room. What are we thinking about that? Pretty standard, I think.
Yeah. Looking when we were doing this, I was really on the fence, and I think Dustin, you were too. But we like that fifth edge spot I felt like that was the one that was up for grabs. I know the fans really love Bo Richter. I just didn't see a path for him to make it. And it's not that he was bad. It's just that the edge room is just going to be that damn good next year. And it's something I'm really looking forward to. And honestly, edge depth has been a thing that we've really been lacking in the last 3 to 4 years, because before it was just Daniil Hunter. And on the other end, it would be a Band-Aid and Zadarius Smith, or a tail end of his career. Yeah, DJ Wanham, tail end of his career, Everson Griffin. So they really didn't have that second guy. And now that you really have 3 guys that can rush the passer, and especially a guy like Van Ginkel, I kind of think he's more of a I kind of compared like Josh Metellus. He's like a Swiss Army knife for the front seven. So Josh Metellus is more the guy that can play slot corner, he can play linebacker, play safety. Van Ginkel can kind of do that all too. He can kind of rush through the A gap, stand as a standard edge guy in a 3-4. He also play a little sub linebacker too, which might come in handy those passing downs. So maybe on those man blitzes, Van Ginkel can become a really nice tool to have. So it's really relieving to have those 3 guys. And I think Dallas Turner will get his. He was the best edge, best defensive prospect in this past draft. So he should be fine. That's the guy. Like if there's anyone I was least worried about, it would be Dallas Turner when it came to the rookies. And then Jihad Ward, I also like too. Dustin, you said earlier that the Vikings like guys who could play multiple positions. Jihad Ward kind of does have that build. Who I kind of think he's similar to like what a Josh Pascal is in Detroit. He could play that, hand in the dirt and be more of that 3-4 defensive end, but can also stand up and rush the passer from there, from a stand-up position, and be a standard edge. So you can kind of move him all around. I feel like, he has that build. I think he's like 270-ish.
Well, he's also played D tackle too in training camp, which is interesting.
Yeah, and that's why I think they kind of kept him on there, is because he's a guy that can play multiple positions. He's not going to light up the stat sheet. I know he's coming off a 6-sack performance last year, but I think, I wouldn't really expect that year in and year out. PFF's really not a big fan of him, but it is a guy that provides a body and provides versatility, and basically kills 2 birds with 1 stone with having him on the roster. And I think Patrick Jones, he'll just be a body on this team. I don't think he'll get as much snaps as he has in years past. Because what's he in year 3 now? I want to say, right? I believe year 4.
For who?
Patrick Jones. I think he's in year 4 now, entering year 4. So he is on a contract year. I don't see them really retaining him past this. I think this will be his last year as a Minnesota Viking. 3rd-round pick. Really don't expect him to be a superstar, but there was a lot of shades of a skinnier Zadarius Smith that I saw. Unfortunately, just doesn't work out. I didn't think he was going to be that great. I wouldn't expect all pro levels out of him, but his play style was very similar to Zadarius Smith, and when he was here, kind of brought that similarity for the scheme, which I did really like. So, but I do think Patrick Jones's time is ticking when it comes to the Vikings now that he's the 5th edge guy.
Okay. Defensive tackle, Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, Jonathan Bullard, Levi Drake Rodriguez, the rookie, and Jaquelin Roy, which is now obviously cut. So that one we also got wrong compared to the actual 53-man roster. So on the actual one, Jalen Redmond made the roster, and so did Taki Taimani. Taki, I think, is undrafted. So is Jalen Redmond too. So great for them to make that interior defensive line because the Vikings needed those big bodies, and they're big bodied people. So we need those guys to step in and, fill the gap. They're not big stat sheet fillers, but Taki Taimani had, I think, the highest graded, what was it, overall rookie or defensive rookie rating for PFF. So, awesome for him to make the roster. And then, yeah, other than that, I think all pretty standard. Levi Drake Rodriguez making the roster, awesome, showing that motor in the preseason games, which was awesome. So, other than that,
if you go back to our predictions, we had Jerry Tillery. I think that was obviously a given. They brought him in. This is definitely his last chance to, and he's kind of he's I would say the defensive version of Sam Darnold. He's been on multiple teams at this point, former first round pick. This is pretty much it for him. If he doesn't show anything really of significance now, he's never going to show it. This is pretty much his last chance, I would say. And it's unfortunate because he is a guy that did bring some speed. I believe he went to Notre Dame. So it's unfortunate. He just hasn't really been able to pick up on other teams, but the Vikings are providing him one last shot. We'll see how it works out. I don't really have that many high expectations for him, but he is coming off a building year, kind of similar to Sam Darnold was when his last year was a starter. Jerry Tillery is coming off that building year, so we'll see what kind of happens there. But my expectations aren't going to be very high, and if he obviously exceeds that, I'd very much welcome that. And then Jonathan Bullard, I think that's just a guy who's just going to be a run stuffer, kind of similar to Harrison Phillips. I think he'll balance in and out between Jihad Ward and Levi Drake Rodriguez as that third pass rusher, just depending on what down and distance you are. And then Levi Drake Rodriguez just has that explosion. Big fan favorite. He is a guy that a lot of people are kind of saying similar to John Randall. I wouldn't put that expectation on him, but you could definitely see the shades to him, kind of like how I was saying earlier with Patrick Jones. He does have that motor, that drive to definitely get after the quarterback, which is something fans will always love and respect out of the guys. And then earlier we had Jalen Redmond and Taki Taimani. Taki Taimani was a guy that we were kind of debating between him and Jaquelin Roy. We just went with the latter of Jaquelin Roy because he is a guy that is a veteran. He's kind of been around the block, knows the playbook a little bit, but obviously that's not where they're going. But they're going to shake things up on the defensive line, and they feel like they've seen enough out of Jaquelin Roy, which he's just a guy that really just doesn't have a lot of explosion. Kind of comes off slow, but he's a big body guy. It's just unfortunately just one of those things where he just didn't work out in Minnesota, which it happens. It's the NFL. And then Jalen Redmond, he's the UFL Defensive Player of the Year. Vikings brought him in, had the big forced fumble against the Eagles, and we'll see what happens with him. Hopefully we can kind of get more of that Brandon Aubrey magic out of Jalen Redmond, of guys who found success in the UFL that tend to translate that over to the NFL. So we're kind of seeing it more and more out of the special teams guys. Guys like Devontae Turpin and Brandon Aubrey, who have both won All Pros. But the UFL is definitely bringing in some talent to the NFL. I think since they've been created, I think they've brought in at least one player to the All-Pro list since they've been created. So another guy that's been kind of lighting it up is the Lions kicker, Jake Bates. He's been doing pretty well. So hopefully it's not Jake Bates, and hopefully we get more of that magic here in Minnesota. But we'll see. It's definitely get some options. It's definitely I'd definitely see some growing pains out of the D tackles, but we'll see how it all translates when the regular season starts.
Oh yeah. Linebackers, we have Ivan Pace obviously making the roster, Blake Cashman, Brian Asamoah, and Camus Grugier-Hill. I don't think there's any differences between nothing. I thought Brian Asamoah was probably going to be a release candidate, but end up not being one. Other than that, Dallas Scant was a candidate to make the roster. He had a pretty good preseason as well. Other than that, I think these guys have showed that they're valuable to the team. Camus is a special team guy. So is Brian Asamoah. Brian Asamoah, his rookie year in 2022, has played really well on that defense in the Donatel scheme, but really hasn't seen much action since. So other than that, Ivan Pace, probably a Pro Bowl year ahead for him. Blake Cashman, a solid guy coming in from free agency as well. So other than that, that's a pretty solid group as well.
Yeah, and I know when we were at Cleveland, we were kind of talking about Brian Asamoah a little bit. Asamoah was a guy who definitely had his roster spot challenged. I think Dallas Gant really brought that challenge, brought the pedal to the metal and really challenged Brian Asamoah for that spot. I do think Kamu Grugier-Hill, I felt like he was pretty much safe because he is such a special teams ace. There's always a spot for you on the roster if you can play special teams. So Dallas Gant, definitely brought it. They decided to go with the ladder with Brian Asamoah. Dallas Gant still cleared waivers. I'm kind of shocked he did, and he'll be on the practice squad. So we'll see how it goes with that.
Yeah. I'm going to group defensive backs together, corners and safeties. Stephon Gilmore, the newcomer, awesome, made the roster. Really was going to sweat that one out. Shaq Griffin coming off of the injury, the hamstring. He definitely is making the roster. Byron Murphy, your new slot corner. Caleb Evans, interesting to make the roster. Fabian Moreau is making the roster. I thought he'd be a release candidate. And then Dwight McLaughlin, he was a UDFA. And then for safeties, Harrison Smith, really sweating that one. Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus, Theo Jackson, and Jay Ward. Jay Ward, I think, might play a little bit of both safety and corner. But to our predictions, nothing has changed. Look at that, Drew. We only have 2 predictions wrong. I think that's pretty impressive so far.
Yeah, I definitely thought that was really I think we did a really good job on this. I think, to be honest, I think we kind of beat a lot of the experts out on this. But this is something we didn't change. We have our timestamps here. So what did I send the file like on a Saturday or something like that? We sat down and kind of went through it. But this was a roster where we kind of said it earlier. I think when we had Tyler on, Tyler said there isn't really going to be a ton of surprises. And I think what the biggest surprise was Kene Nwangu, just because of the fact that they went with 2 RBs versus 3 RBs. And he was such a premier kick returner. I think that's probably the biggest surprise. But I think with Dwight McLaughlin, he's definitely proved to be I think he was probably the best guy in the preseason for the Vikings, those out of the rookies pretty much. Dallas Turner, obviously, he's going to have a lot more talent, but he only played pretty much a handful of snaps. But McLaughlin really proved that he belongs in this league, and he's going to be getting a 53-man roster spot. Fabian Moreau, he was kind of a pleasant surprise too. He's been a guy who is kind of getting up there. He's kind of towards the twilight of his career, but he was on, at the time was the Washington Redskins, now Washington Commanders. Fabian Moreau, I thought that was a guy that definitely deserved a roster spot. They did bring him in, especially earlier on in training camp, which usually kind of signs are pointing that they want to keep him on the roster. Caleb Evans, that was probably the most challenging one because there was some steam that he was going to be traded, was going to be waived, ends up getting the roster spot over Duke Shelley, which I think a lot of fans were a little disappointed in. But I think Caleb Evans is probably the better pick. I think Duke Shelley, I think that season that he had was a great season, but I think he's more of that Case Keenum kind of guy where he had just that one good year and he just really can't put it together anywhere else. But which is a shame. But the scheme has changed. We're no longer in that Ed Donatell defense. We're in the Brian Flores defense now. So it's just a different scheme, and it was just a nice familiar face, get fans excited for during the offseason. But Caleb Evans, I do think, was the better of the 2. But I won't say that his spot is still safe by any means. They could easily bring in a guy, draft a guy next year, and I do think that this will probably be his last year on the roster, most likely. Byron Murphy, he'll probably play the most in the slot to kind of mask that Mekhi Blackman injury and can kind of play outside if they're going with more of that 12 personnel. And then Shaquille Griffin will play more in that nickel role. He'll play on the opposite of Stephon Gilmore. And then obviously Stephon Gilmore is going to be on there. You paid him all that money. So, but yeah, I think honestly what really kind of bit through the biggest wrench into this, I would say, Dustin, if you want to say something on this, was the Lewis Cine release is probably the biggest news out of the defensive back room. So what are your kind of thoughts on Lewis Cine kind of moving on and getting waived by the Vikings today, and not even clearing waivers and not even bringing him back on a practice squad, to say the least. So I think he was signed by the Jets later on after the waiver period. So what are your thoughts on Lewis Cine no longer being a Minnesota Viking?
Yeah, I think the writing was pretty much on the wall, since Brian Flores got here, where he really wasn't getting much playing time, whether that was because of the injured leg from the year prior or whatever it was. The writing was just on the wall. And as you guys can see on our predictions, we don't even have Lewis Cine making the roster. And you'll probably see too, or if we get down to here, going to the practice squad too. Like Drew said, he didn't even make the practice squad for the Vikings. The Jets outright signed him from waivers or after waivers. So it's just, I guess, unfortunate that Kwesi's first round draft pick, his first pick ever, didn't really pan out, because of whatever happened, whether that was the injury, learning a playbook, whatever it was. Obviously, we don't know. I wish nothing but the best for Lewis Cine. Great guy. Hopefully he can ball out with the Jets, just not against us in London. That's really a real twist on things, because he's going back to London and he'll be facing the Vikings, and it's going to be a huge story. Not a huge story, but it's going to be something to look into. So other than that, I think it wasn't really a surprise at all that he wasn't going to make the roster. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that.
Yeah, like you said, Lewis Cine will be coming in London at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which is the same stadium he did have that horrific leg injury his rookie season. So I think that's definitely going to be on his mind. I don't think he'll really be playing that much, to be honest with you. But, we'll see what happens with him in New York. With him, nothing but the best. I did think that I thought there was going to be a trade. I thought it was going to be similar to that Joshua Dobbs kind of deal, where it was like a later round pick and then plus Lewis Cine, and then it was like essentially like a pick swap, essentially, but just throwing Lewis Cine in there. I thought that's what we were going to end up getting, because he is a former first round pick. You really didn't have to pay him that much. I think he was only on the hook for like $1.5 million. So I was kind of shocked that no one really even kicked the tires on that. But yeah, like I said, Lewis Cine definitely was probably the biggest challenge of surfing our way through, predicting what the defensive back room was going to look like, because that Cleveland game really showed us something, that maybe there is something there, but it ends up, like I said, he gets cut, he gets waived, and he's moving on to New York. But what really just shocks me more is how the LSU offense from college, how most of those guys, or their core guys, have all found success like in the NFL with their, obviously their identity being their offense. With Georgia, there's been nobody really there. I mean, there's not been one star from that Georgia defense that everyone was just raving about. I mean, maybe Jordan Davis, but Jordan Davis is okay. He's not like great. He's not lighting it up. He's not an all-pro.
He's not what everybody's expecting him to be, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. He's a tall guy. He'll he'll obviously eat up guys at the D line, but he's not an every down guy. But Lewis Cine was a guy that led that defense in tackles too. So the fact that he hasn't worked out really puts into question what these other guys are going to do. And the Kobe Dean really hasn't proved much at Philly. He kind of had a redshirt year, really didn't light up the world his first year. Quay Walker, he's too busy shoving trainers down in Green Bay and crying in the locker room. So I don't know what's up with him, but and he really is a guy that I would even say hasn't really done much either. I don't get why Packer fans are really always on him. I think the guy sucks. I think we kind of run all over him. He gets thrown on. He has pass rating over 100 consistently. So I just don't see the hype around him. I think he's a dud. Devontae Wyatt, another Packer player. Have you heard of him, Dustin? I've not seen him on the field whatsoever. Hasn't really done anything.
He's all right. He's all right. Kind of like a Jordan Davis. He's just there. He's all right.
Yeah, I guess he'd be our Jerry Tillery essentially. I think that's kind of what we're more seeing out of him. I mean, you're drafting a guy, the Packers, let's not forget, they also drafted Kenny Clark pretty late in the first round too. Ends up being a really good player for him for years to come. He just signed his 3rd contract with them. Like these guys on the Georgia defense, I thought was going to be like a replication of, that translation from that 2019 LSU to the NFL. Just hasn't worked out, which is really shocking me. Not one guy has been anything relevant in the NFL from that defense. And that's probably the most shocking thing for me that I've been thinking about since the Lewis Cine waiver earlier today. So,
yeah, it's like I said, it's just unfortunate. And, honestly, I just wish nothing for the best for him. Great kid, from what I've seen in interviews and everything like that. So hopefully he balls out in New York, just not against us. And like you said, he probably won't get much playing time on the Jets, but any other playing time he gets, hopefully he balls out and, shows why he does belong in the NFL. So other than that, we'll move on to special teams. No surprises here. Will Reichert, Ryan Wright, Andrew DePaula. You're awesome. You're all pro. Long snapper is there. Ryan Wright, your big leg punter. And then Will Reichert, the cookie. Not the cookie. Oh, my God. The rookie. I don't know why I call him a cookie. That's weird. Rookie, Will Reichert. So other than that, no surprises there. I think we can move on to practice squad then. Just real quick, through our predictions, Sammy Reyes, he's on the practice squad, but he's on a different practice squad than everybody else. He gets his own little practice squad because he's an international pathway guy. Vikings really like him too. Deshaun Jones, Bo Richter, Lucky Jackson, Dwayne McBride, Tyrese Robinson, Jalen Redmond, N'Keal Harry, Duke Shelley, Nishan Wright, Dallas Gant, Owen Porter, Jordan Kunacek, Gabriel Murphy, Taki Taimani, Andre Carter, and Myles Gaskin. That was our predictions. And then versus what actually happened, Sammy Reyes is still on that practice squad, his own practice squad. Deshaun Jones, Bo Richter, Lucky Jackson, Dwayne McBride, Tyrese Robinson. Henry Bird is on the practice squad. Thayer Thomas is on there. Nishan Wright, Dallas Scamp, Bobby McCain is returning. Robert Tunyon, Jonah Williams, Jalen Williams, Andre Carter, Myles Gaskin. So I think maybe like 3 or 4 guys that we didn't have in our predictions made the practice squad. So if anything you want to add to that?
And like I said, this was made before Gabriel Murphy and Jonathan Kunacek were transitioned to the IR spots. So at the time, I still think they would have made the roster, and I think that's a big reason why they were put on the IR and short-term IRs is because they did have a spot on this roster. Kunacek was a guy I was really impressed with, especially in special teams, and I think he played really good in those late 3rd and 4th quarters. He was definitely a guy that stood out in Cleveland, in my opinion. Obviously we missed on Taki Taimani. Owen Porter, he's just no longer on the Vikings, which was a shame because I felt like he did pretty well. He was definitely a guy that showed out. I think he deserved to have a spot on this roster. So, it's one of those things, kind of similar to Lewis Cine. We'll wish you the best, but we'll see what happens with him. I think that's kind of it. That's pretty much the roster right now. I think just the biggest questions we're getting out of this is, there's still potential battles going on. I still think with Reisner and Quessenberry, we'll kind of see what happens with that, with Reisner being on the short-term IR. And then Gabriel Murphy, I think we forgot to mention this, but Gabriel Murphy is a guy who, does he challenge Patrick Jones for that 5th spot? Is Patrick Jones' spot still safe for the next couple weeks? I don't think it is. I think, like I said, I was kind of shocked that, it was kind of picking between 2 guys with Andre Carter and Bo Richter and all these other guys. And Patrick Jones, I think they just went with the guy who they felt like he had a little bit more experience, understood the playbook a little bit more. But I think Gabriel Murphy could definitely challenge Patrick Jones too with these, I think out of the guys that were on the short-term IR. So it'll definitely be interesting when week 4 rolls around. I think you'll see maybe some potential cuts still. Like I said, this is just the initial roster. They just had to get it down by today. But I still think there's definitely some changes still brewing in the next couple of weeks and the next month too. So we'll see how that all breaks out.
Yeah, like Drew said, this is only just to start off the season. A lot can change from even week 1 to week 2. Not much would change, but even week 1 to the bye week, a lot can change too. So other than that, our 53-man roster projection outside of the practice squad, it's kind of hard to predict practice squad guys, but outside of that, I think we did pretty good. I mean, we only missed, let's see, what was it? Two guys out of the whole 53-man roster. That's pretty impressive if you ask me. So, like Drew said earlier, we can timestamp it for you guys too. We did not just copy and paste the actual roster and just say, oh, this guy, because that's not what we did. We went on Saturday, or what was it? What day was it?
I think it was over this past weekend.
Yeah, this past weekend, Saturday, Sunday, one of those days. We went over this, and we were actually strategically looking at this because we're like, oh, what could you do? But the Vikings, the coaching staff were like, you know what? Let's get rid of Kenny Nwangu. Screw him. We don't need him on kickoffs. We don't need a third running back. But not really. But other than that, that's just kind of what they thought of the roster, and we were pretty close. Maybe they should hire us as the guys to get their roster because we were pretty damn close. So yeah. Other than that, Drew, if you have anything else to add, I can end the episode here then.
No, I think we're all we're just ready for a week 1 win against the Giants. We'll see how Sam Darnold looks. I think it's a good tune-up game potentially for Darnold if there is anything left in the tank. And then you have week 2 against the 49ers. So we'll kind of see how this all shakes out and this whole Sam Darnold roller coaster ends. So like I said, it's like we said when we first started the podcast, I will say this is a season where there aren't going to be a lot of expectations. It's a good one where you can, look back if they suck. Guess what? You get a top pick. You get McCarthy back next year, who Kevin O'Connell's a fan of, has a great personality, is a proven leader, and is definitely shown it on the field when he was healthy. And he passer rating and efficiency that he had and throwing the ball with one leg is still astounding to me. So if J.J. McCarthy can turn that around on one leg versus the Raiders, who knows what he can do against the starters. So I'm definitely excited for when 2025 rolls around. So, but if this whole Sam Darnold thing flames out and we get a top pick, guess what? You get a top pick for J.J. McCarthy to play with next year, Kevin O'Connell. So, and guess what? If they're good, you're winning football games, and Sam Darnold gets a nice comp third-round pick going to another team. So this is the best win-win scenario you can get out of this for the Vikings and their future. So I do think they're very, very close to contending for the playoffs year in and year out, which is something we really haven't seen out of this Vikings team probably since the Culpepper Moss era from that late 90s where they're just a consistent winner. Because it just feels like I think all us Vikings fans are sick and tired of they're having the 1 year good and then the dud year the following year. We want a consistent team that can just win, at the very least, just win consistently. That's all we want. We're tired of having this roller coaster ride. So, but we're excited for week 1. I want to get started. I'm excited. So, but yeah, that's kind of all I got to say about that. We'll see how this thing shakes out. So we'll see.
And that was Drew's TED Talk for you guys. No, other than that, we'll have a couple episodes before we get to week 1 here. Just kind of going over some, other things about the roster and, predictions about week 1 or whatever else happens. We could sign freaking Byron. What's his name?
Byron Young.
No, Howard, the corner.
Xavier Howard.
Xavier, why would I think Byron? Okay, whatever. Xavier Howard, we could sign him too. So who knows what will happen. Stick around for 612 Vikings. Make sure you guys follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, 612 Vikings, and then on Twitter as well at 612 Vikings. And we'll see you guys in the next episode. Skol Vikes.